Hello and welcome to This is Baltimore 2, where we show you what's good in your Baltimore neighborhood. I'm your host, Odessa Rose, and today we are in Southwest Baltimore talking with poet Matt Harris.
At 8:45 a.m. on a Thursday morning in downtown Baltimore, as the rush hour crowd goes to work, poet Matt Harris sets up his office to sell his books on Baltimore Street. Writers have to find creative ways to get people to see their work. For Matt Harris, this is truly ironic because he is blind. Matt grew up in the Lakeland community of Southwest Baltimore. He was raised on Norland Avenue, which he describes in his book, Seeing Through Blindness.
I lived here from age 3 until I was 14. And a typical day would be, I would come outside and I would find friends. I mean, there was always people out, running around, and we'd play football in the street, touch football, rode my bike a lot. We just had fun, just hung out. And it was just always a good time. And it was always bustling. There was always, something to do. And I really liked it here. And, part of my heart is still here, even though I've been gone for nearly 40 years. And, I have a lot of good memories here. And, just a lot of childhood friends. And it just was a secure time in my life when I lived here. I always thought it was just going to be, it'll always be here. When I lived here,
Matt's childhood was also a time of change and life-altering events. He describes his adventures and difficulties growing up.
When I lived here, I didn't know that I was going blind. I didn't know what the problem was. And back then I had more sight. So I could ride a bike, but I still ran into things. I would run into cars. I would run into, there used to be a Pantry Pride across the street. And I ran into one of their little concrete stops where a car will, park against one day. And I was flying down there and I hit that thing and I hit the asphalt and just, busted up my face and my knees and everything. And I was always running into things, as a kid. But since I could see clearly, they didn't know what it was. They just, well, he's clumsy, he's accident prone, he's this, he's that. So they didn't really know what my deal was. And my parents even took me to doctors, and the doctors didn't know. They couldn't figure it out. They said, well, he's fine. We can't find anything wrong with him. He's got 20/20 vision, I mean, so, that's kind of how that all, worked out. And being up here in the city, it was like at nighttime, for instance, we had street lights, and it was bright. Right. And what I have is, I have a disease, an eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. And what happens is that takes the visual field of a person. And the normal visual field of a normal eyesight is 180 degrees. Mm-hmm. Right now I have 1 degree left, and everything's blurry. Another symptom is night blindness. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was up here living in the city, like I say, it was bright at night. I never even knew I had night blindness until we moved down to Pasadena. Mm-hmm. And the first night I'm down there, I'm like, man, it's really dark down here. It's like what, what's going on? But it didn't bother anyone else. I couldn't understand. Well, I'm running into trees, I'm running into fences, I'm running into everything. I can't see anything at nighttime. But yet everyone else is, it's not bothering. No, we don't. No, it's no big deal.
So it's not as if your family just ignored the problem. They tried, they took you to doctors to see what was going on,
and the doctors couldn't find anything. I mean, even at one point, they took me to Johns Hopkins, the Wilmer Eye Clinic. Mm-hmm. They couldn't find anything. Other than I had lost, they noticed I had lost some peripheral vision, mm-hmm. but they didn't know why. And they gave me they wanted to make sure I didn't have a brain tumor, so they mm-hmm. checked for that. I didn't have a brain tumor. So they didn't, they say, he's okay, so, he's good to go. And I still had the 20/20 vision, which few people call.
Right.
And so as I progressed and as I got older, then the symptoms got worse. But yet, I was expected to perform as a sighted person, you know, and that is like where a lot of the problems came in, a lot of the confusion. You know, I didn't really, I didn't have anything, I didn't know what it was, so I didn't know how to define it or deal with it.
A major life-altering event for Matt happened when he played Little League Baseball.
I was reluctant to even really want to play. I mean, I really love baseball, but I was having problems seeing the ball, and particularly when it was hit off of the bat. And that is also a symptom of the RP that I had, because my peripheral vision wasn't picking the ball up. So I really felt kind of stressed out actually when he said that. But you know, the field back when I was a little kid, it just seemed so much bigger than it is now, and it's amazing. And then the fence is still here, and I just can't believe that. You know, it looks just like it did that day 40 years ago. And I was starting to feel more like an outcast, because everybody else could see the ball, and I had 20/20 vision, and I just kept thinking, well, maybe I'm not looking at the ball right, or I'm just not using my eyes right. And that's why I said, well, you know, maybe today I'll see the ball better, because I never knew. So it was very confusing, and I did start feeling more and more like an outcast, like I didn't fit in. And I was expected to go out in right field and at least see the ball. Yeah. You know, at least if the ball come out, you know, pick it up and throw it back in, even if I missed it. Yeah. You know, so, but it didn't work out that way.
In the book,
Matt describes his baseball experience in his book.
Sure, I can go ahead and try to recite that passage for you if you like. On a bright day, I stood in right field, brandishing my brand new baseball glove, armed to the teeth with several pieces of bazooka bubblegum. I worked my molars and my mandible while bubbles bloomed and popped until the umpire shouted, "Play ball!" Our pitcher threw wildly, walking the first 3 batters on 12 straight pitches. When Louis Paul, batting cleanup, lumbered to the plate, I began to pray, "Dear God, please don't let him hit the ball my way." But God said no to my prayer and yes to Louis Paul's instead. Deep to right field, the blast sailed over my head. I never saw it, not even a glimpse. I heard it though rattle the rusty fence. So I scanned its grassy bottom. With my eyes, I squinted and squinted as Nicholas, our first baseman, ran past me. He growled through clenched teeth, glinting with braces. "You moron, what the heck's your problem, Matt?" "Wish I knew," I said. As he hurled the ball home, the bases had emptied. 4 runs had scored. When Nicholas's gloved hand struck my head, it didn't hurt as much as the din of laughter from the stands. So there, in right field, I swallowed my gum, my pride, and stood there alone like a blade of grass about to be mown. An edge of hardness began sharpening itself on a whetstone inside me that day. And back then, it was too intangible for me to have dulled it. After that incident, I mean, that might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but when you're 11 years old, I mean, Little League was like a real big deal. And I was just very, very humiliated after that. And after that, I noticed there was a change in me. I began to harden toward God and also toward society at that point. And I can actually trace it back to that event. I had mentioned...
Matt describes his physical and spiritual journey from a substance abuser to a new creature.
Missing the ball and not being able to see it. And it was very humiliating to me. And soon after that, I started to numb off by using drugs and alcohol. And I also had mentioned that my heart that day began to harden toward God and toward society. And what really finally got me and caused me to hit rock bottom was when I started using PCP. And we would smoke it, mix it with parsley flakes, and we called it flakes back then. And we would smoke them and get high. And so 8 years after I missed the ball that day, there was just a gradual decline in me until I hit rock bottom 8 years later. And that was the night I got arrested for possession of PCP. And I talk about that in the book.
How did you come out of that?
Well, after that, after my arrest, and we went to trial, and actually the judge threw it out on a technicality. And I was facing a couple years in prison. I was really scared. I mean, that was some of the, one of the most scariest days of my life when I stand before a judge and he's got your freedom in his hand, And it got thrown out on a technicality, and I was like, wow, what a, I was just relieved, My dad, when we moved down to Pasadena, he started going to a church. It was called Lakeshore Baptist Church. And he really changed his life around. He wasn't the same dad that used to be here. When we lived here, he drank. I mean, he didn't drink a lot, but I mean, he partied, he did things, But when we moved down there, he started living for God. And I was like, who is this guy? Because I don't know this man. And he started sharing things about Jesus with me. He started sharing things about the Bible with me, things that I had never heard of before. And I rejected it, and he and I were at odds for a long time. But he loved me enough where he kept praying for me, and he kept sharing the gospel with me. I didn't want to hear it, I didn't want to hear it. But eventually, I started listening to him. Finally, on December 12th, 1982, I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ, and I asked him to come in and save me, and he did. And He's changed me. He's given me eternal life. And, I'm a new creation.
New creation, as opposed to what's in the first line of your book. It says, "Allow me to introduce you to the beast I once was before I came to this new creature through the blood of God's Son." That's how you start that book.
Yep, that's it. Because that's what my writing is about. My writing ultimately, I wanted to point to Jesus, and that's my journey to Jesus, and that's what I wanted to write about. And seeing through blindness was the beast I was before I came to Christ. Because, I was blind, but I was still a sinner. I was still a thief. I was still a druggie. I was a rotten person. You can be blind and be rotten. It's like it doesn't matter. And what I wanted to do with Seeing Through Blindness was just, I wanted to share about my blindness and the struggles and everything. But it's also about spiritual blindness. I was spiritually blind. And really, that's a worse state of blindness than physical blindness.
Well, Jenny says this: an angel must have been looking out for you, or some other higher power, Jenny says. I do believe God delivered me somehow. But for what reason, I have no clue. Do you have a clue now?
I do. I have a clue now. And God was working on me then. That was before I came to Christ. But he was working on me then. And I knew he delivered me from all the trouble that I had been in for something. And I think today is one of those things.
We're out here at the baseball field, and in your book you talk about loving baseball, and even when you're sitting in your Mustang, you're listening to the ball game. Do you still follow sports, baseball like that?
I kind of had to just give it up because I guess it's like I guess it's like being in a relationship and you get separated and you just kind of have to get away from the person. It's kind of like that with baseball and me, because I just loved it so much. And so I really don't. I mean, I hope the O's win. I hope they go all the way.
In reading the book, I was thinking about how you could explain away your clumsiness, if you will, or your inability to walk and without running into things. You could blame it on the alcohol, and people were willing to accept that more than some kind of physical problem. And I think it's because people have a hard time understanding mental problems and things that you can't control.
Yeah, and things they can't see.
Right.
Necessarily too.
Right.
Yeah. Like now I have the cane, so not only does this help me get around, but it lets people know, hey, he's got a problem. So it's an identifiable thing. But I had 20/20 vision, so how do you do that? I had a driver's license. Maryland gave me a driver. I thought, okay, when I went to get my driver's license, I thought, okay, they're going to get me. They're going to figure this thing out. Maryland is not going to give this boy a driver's license. I got a driver's license. No restrictions for the eyes. It's like, I'm crazy. And so that, these were the things I thought, okay, so Maryland gave me a driver's license. I really can't drive at night because I can't see. I really kind of need yellow lines, or the double yellow. I know they're double yellow, even though I can't tell the color, but double. I kind of need that as a guide, but yet I have no restrictions on my license. What's wrong with this picture? That's kind of what I went through, and mentally I didn't know how to, and as a young person, I just didn't know how to handle all that. When all my friends are getting in their car and doing their thing, and right. And I'm like behind, and but yeah, that created a lot of confusion for me.
Having to give up your Mustang, you had to give up baseball, you had to give up your Mustang. How did all that? How were you able to just get through all of that? I drank a lot.
So I sat in my Mustang and drank and cried and this, that, and the other. But what I've realized since, because I wasn't diagnosed until I was 21, and when I was 21 years old, they diagnosed me with retinitis pigmentosa. I was legally blind at that point, and I had 20/20 vision, so I was a paradox. But what I've learned, and I grieved, and I didn't even realize it, but it's a grieving process that you go through. And people with RP, they can do things, 1 year, the next year they can't, so they lose that, and they grieve. It's just a grieving process, and eventually you get over it, but then something else comes, and then you got to grieve that.
Matt explains the events that led to him becoming a poet and the challenges he faces as a writer.
When did you realize you wanted to write?
It was in 1994, and I was 34 years old, and I had an opportunity to go to college. It was at Anne Arundel Community College, and I was going to be a counselor, but the first class I took was an English class. And we were studying poetry. As I was studying the poetry, I just felt the Lord was just calling me to write poetry. And after that class, I actually changed my major to English. And I started studying English and poetry specifically. And what I realized that after I became a believer, I received Christ as my Savior, I started studying the King James Bible at age 22. So for 12 years I had been studying that, and not only was I learning God's Word, but He was actually wiring my brain for poetry, because the language is so poetic. And so that's when it started.
What's your writing process like?
Well, I like to write in the morning. Mentally I'm better in the morning, so I like to wake up and start doing it in the morning. I like to research. Well, seeing through blindness, I didn't have to research that much because it was about me. So I could just get up and just start writing. But other books that I've written, I do a lot of research, and then I just do research broadly and just start whittling it down. since my books are poetry, I'll usually come up with an image, a word, or something like that, and I can build a stanza around that.
For you to have lost your sight, your imagery is just awesome. I mean, you can describe things and your metaphors, your similes are dead on. How do you do that?
I feel that when I first started studying poetry 20 years ago, God gave me a gift that it's a beautiful gift, and it's for me. And when I close my eyes, I can see things like that. So when I close my eyes, sometimes I can see more beauty than when they're open, because when they're open, things are blurry and steamy and things like that. So it somehow God gives it to me inside. I see it in my mind's eye. I can't really explain where it comes from, but that's where it is.
That's one of the things that struck me in your book, all the metaphors. I mean, the writing is really good. I mean, you do a great job just putting people in the moment, letting people know how you're feeling, what was going on, what you saw. But I did notice that there is an absence of color in your book.
Well, that's interesting because, well, for one, I am colorblind, right. So I don't see color. Right. And maybe that's why.
Yeah.
And I never really even thought about that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'll have to try to work on that. I'm probably a lot of sound.
Yes,
there are visual things, but and tactile. But you're right about that. Color doesn't mean anything to me. It's like in fact, I wear a lot of black, gray kind of things like that, because when I put something on, I want to make sure it matches, right. No matter what it is, and I don't want to have to worry about things not matching. So I never really thought about that, but that's probably why.
Mm-hmm. Baltimore, you describe Baltimore really well in your book, from crabs to everything.
Yeah.
So what does Baltimore mean to you?
I love Baltimore. It has a personality.
How are you able to write and not be able to see?
I have a computer and it's set up with zoom text. So it drives sighted people crazy when they look at it. They can't stand it. Please put it back to normal. Right. But it allows me to function. And also I have the way I can read now. Thank God for the Kindle, because I can read. I read your books in the Kindle, which were very good too.
Thank you.
And so fortunately the technology enables me to do that. Now at some point I will probably lose that and be grieving that, and then I'll have to figure it out.
If you do that, will you stop writing, or will you find a way?
I will find a way. And my eyes are closed. I see it in my mind. As long as I got the keyboard, I can, I'll go ahead and do it. And there's Braille I can learn. And, I'll figure it out somehow.
When I first met you, I was going on my way to work, and you were out on Baltimore Street. And when I saw you with your table, and you're blind, and I'm going, here's this guy that can't see, and he's out here doing something that most writers are terrified to do, which is just go out there in front of everybody and say, hey, buy my book. We are terrified to do that. How do you get up the courage to do that?
Maybe because I don't see the reactions. Maybe blindness is a blessing in that area. Maybe if I saw everything, I wouldn't do it. I just, I guess, and another thing is my message. I want to get mainly my message of Christ out to people, and really, I'm an evangelist at heart, so I think that has a lot to do with it too. And I love going out there though. I love going down Baltimore Street in Annapolis and being out there with the people, and just, I love it.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you for joining us, and please tune in again so we can show you what's good in your Baltimore neighborhood.